Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Yo, what up, what up? It's your boy Rubino.
And this DJ in the building.
And you listening to the UpNUp Podcast.
Yeah.
Wait, what are we doing?
I don't know, just listen.
Yes. Welcome.
What it do?
Ladies and gentlemen, you're tuning to the UpNUp Podcast. I'm your host, Rubino.
And I'm DJ man.
How you feeling, man?
I'm good.
Good?
Ready.
Feeling great?
Yes, sir.
Feeling better? Living
Yep.
better?
Always.
Yeah, we gotta wake your game up, bro.
My game.
Nah, man. If this is your first time tuning in, this is the UpNUp Podcast, hence the name UpNUp. We're here dedicated to share amazing stories of individuals who are grinding, going after what they want, letting nothing stop them from getting that, and they're staying on the up and up and constantly cultivating culture and all that good stuff, right?
Yes, sir.
Before we get to it, I do also want to always shout out all the consistent supporters, the listeners, the viewers, the champions, those out there who are helping us and pushing the movement, man. We appreciate you guys. We love you guys. Make sure you to rate, subscribe, and review. You can catch all our episodes on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, all that. And what? And like it
and
too,
like
right?
it too, yeah. That's the one you forget, but it's cool.
I know. I'm not on my ish. Now, getting that out the way, I mean, if you're a consistent listener, you already know, man. We always bring a guest with a compelling story. Someone that's going to inspire you, someone that's going to motivate you to want to go after yours and whatever it is you're going after. Today's guest, I would say, is a woman that is continuously setting an example for our culture on how to use your voice to uplift those who don't have a voice. I would say she's a true leader who's keeping everything she's doing on the up and up. Otherwise, she wouldn't be in this seat today. She's a recipient of many awards and accolades. Just to name a few, she's a Seattle King County NAACP Presidential Leadership Award recipient, City Arts Artist of the Year Award, Seattle Poetry Slam Grand Champion. The list goes on. I mean, how much time we got? I don't know. We all got curfews. And of course, last but not least, she was the first political candidate of the Seattle People's Party to run for mayor of Seattle in the 2017 mayoral election. Our guest is none other than a determined, and in the words of Maya Angelou, phenomenal woman, Nikkita Oliver. Can we get a round of applause? Yeah. We got an audience today, right? How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Yeah?
It's been a long day, but I'm really honored to be here on the show.
Yes. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you. And again, it's been a long day, but hopefully we can get through and we can get these people through it too and pick them up.
It's always about teamwork, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Teamwork make the dream work. Now, if you're not familiar with the show, we usually start it off with a quote of the day. Just something to get the mind right, get our vibe right. And my guy right here, he's a man of words. You know what I mean? He always got these quotes running in his head. So what you got for us today, man?
Well, this one, I got it from Nikita's website.
Oh, okay.
Oh, snap.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had to
You
bring
better
it
doing
for
your
this one.
research.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the quote is, "Justice is just us being just us."
You know who said that?
Who?
Myself. It's in a poem I do.
I thought it was somebody else with the way you
I
asked
would
me
have had
that.
a quote. I would have put quotes around it and a little.
Yeah.
You gotta cite your work.
My plan was to let you explain that.
Oh, that's so nice of you.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's I wrote a poem for an event. It was a Water is Life event, and I had gone to Standing Rock to work with the Red Owl Legal Collective and to take supplies to some friends who were out there. And after the event, when we came back to Seattle, or after being there, when we came back to Seattle, we knew we probably couldn't go back. We have jobs here. We have people who depend on us. And a friend of mine, Matt Rimley, and another friend named Rachel Heaton, both Native folks, were organizing an event. And Matt asked me if I would write an original poem. And so that line is in that poem. thinking about water and thinking about justice and just the idea, the law and justice are two totally different things. And in fact, the law has to be constructed to serve justice. But at the end of the day, especially for, people who are marginalized by the system, when it comes down to it, real justice is us getting to be just ourselves. So justice is just us being just us. But also, for justice to exist, we have to choose to be a just people. So
that's real.
Yeah.
That's real.
Really
I think it's like it also aligns with just living in your truth.
Right.
A lot of times society tries to, restrain us from being who we want to be and who we are and being comfortable in being who we are. So
Exactly.
yeah, that quote speaks volumes for real.
Definitely.
It's a good one, man. Look at you, man.
No,
I
it is
feel
a
all
good one.
honored.
Look at you. I know,
You
man.
read my website.
I know, man.
Views up.
Look at you, man. That's what's up. So, obviously, for those who are familiar with your work, what we like to do is actually give people a more candid, transparent look at the people that they support the most, the people that they follow, right? So we'll get into everything you're doing currently, but I do want to kind of take it back a little bit to kind of the upbringings for you, right? You grew up in Indiana, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Born and
cool.
raised.
So tell us a little bit about growing up in Indiana and I guess how that kind of influenced, your journey and your trajectory.
Yeah. Born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. My mom is this 5-foot, real fiery white lady. Prays a lot. Always asks me how I'm doing in my faith. And my father is a black man from Louisiana.
Okay.
And Indianapolis is a place, unlike Seattle, where racism is very much, it's bold. It's not the kind of like passive racism we experience here. And so I grew up in a place where I very much knew there were differences in the way people were treated based on skin color. Like I had no illusions about that. But I also grew up in the church. And so kind of like my first experience of being a lawyer, quote unquote, was being in church and asking really hard questions. And so kind of coupling those two things together of like growing up in the church, learning to ask hard questions, but also watching injustice kind of manifest right before my eyes, gave me like a very deep sense of sometimes I call it a little bit of a justice complex, because if something unjust happens in front of me, I have a really hard time
Just
sitting still.
with it.
I can't just sit with it. Like even as a kid,
Yeah.
if I got in trouble for something I didn't do, or someone else got in trouble for something they didn't do and I knew it, I would start running my mouth. So, in terms of like where I am now, it's very much rooted in who I've kind of always been as a child. And my mom has always encouraged that, using my voice, expressing my thoughts, even when it was, I think maybe to her, mental and emotional detriment with my little teenage self. But
it's called evolution,
right? You learn to choose your battles a little better as you get older. But I think that growing up in Indiana, that was a big part of just kind of how I lived my life. Was knowing that you should speak up for what's right. But also, my mom is a very compassionate individual, and really taught my sister and I and my siblings that you should always give first, that serving people in service is very important to how you change the world and how you win over hearts and minds. And so she also really instilled in us a sense of compassion and empathy for people around us.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I love just kind of hearing kind of the upbringing. I don't know much about Indiana. I know Michael Jackson from there, right?
From Gary. People always say to me, "Are you from Gary?" I'm like,
yeah, right.
Not all black people in Indiana are from
I'm
Gary.
not gonna lie though. When I read that you were, when I actually listened to the Glow Up podcast, and I heard that you grew up there, so I was like, was it Gary? I didn't know.
That's what people always say.
Yeah.
So, why Seattle? So how did that?
That's a great question. I'm gonna tell y'all a top secret story that I've probably told on 3 other podcasts. So I mentioned my mom is very much in the church. Growing up, we did this thing called Bible quizzing, where you would like literally memorize whole chapters of the Christian Bible, and then you would go places and compete against other children to see who knew the Bible best.
Oh, that's real. I didn't know that. I didn't know that
It was deep. They had these little seats you would sit on, and you would try to jump up before the other people, and
damn.
You could pre-jump and complete the question. It was very intense. Okay, it was deep. So I came out here it was either my junior or senior year. I think it was my junior year of high school. To Seattle Pacific University to compete in a national Bible quizzing competition.
Oh, so it's big leagues
Yeah,
right here.
it was a big deal, y'all.
It's going down.
And I was at SPU. It was the year before my senior year, and so I hadn't really thought about going to college. That was not really something that was on my wavelength, or I wasn't thinking about it. But then I got out here and I realized how far it was from Indiana and the cornfields, and it like kind of felt like a new world. And so I got back to Indiana and I was like, I'm trying to figure out how I get to Seattle. I also very much liked the rain, and I really liked it then. I still like it
Interesting.
now. I know, right?
Most people,
Yeah, for real.
I like the rain. I'm from here, but I like the rain. I love
Right.
it. Gives me a good balance, helps me focus. But
It makes things feel fresh. It's all green out
Yeah,
here. And
yeah,
so I was like, I think I want to move to Seattle.
Okay.
And I used college as my opportunity to do that.
mm,
And obviously that came with some challenges because SPU was not the friendliest school for,
it's
Yeah.
private. It's a
all of us.
private school, right?
It's a private liberal arts evangelical school. And when I got there, it was only 4% students of color.
Damn.
So it was not the friendliest environment to step into as someone who was kind of like growing into knowledge of self. And, you know,
and also
so-
kind of going from you would say kind of more a rural area into the city.
Well, I mean, Indianapolis is pretty city.
Okay.
It's like a confused city. Like people there are kind of country, but we live in a city.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got a much larger population of black folks,
Okay.
right? So,
So that's a difference right there.
Yeah.
oh, huge difference.
Yeah.
For real.
Wow. Okay. Well, since we're on the topic of you coming to Seattle and moving, I guess out west, if you want to call it that.
The Wild West.
we're trying to get away from this country. Should I just say the Wild West? All right. Obviously college is a tool a lot of people use, right? A lot of great leaders, a lot of great thinkers use to kind of figure out what it is they want to do, right?
Yeah.
So for you, obviously you witnessed a lot growing up in Indiana as far as like injustices. But what was kind of that first cause that you rallied around? I know for me, like when I was in college, that's when I kind of became woke, if you want to call it that, right? That's when people were getting involved and going to rallies on campus and things like that. But what was kind of that first cause for you that told you, I feel so passionately about this that I'm going to dedicate more time than I usually do?
Yeah, it wasn't even really a cause. So at SPU, when I got there, they did this thing called Early Connections. And really it was get all the black and brown and poor students together in advance of the rest of the students getting there so they can have some friends, and I feel like they get drowned by the rest of the students. So, I made some friends that first week, fresh from Indiana, like have never seen a public transportation system like the one Seattle has, even though it's not great. Like I hadn't been anywhere yet.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, got a little bit of culture shock going. And then all of the white students show up and I couldn't find the people that I had arrived at SPU with. And I remember being like, yo, Mom, I got like $700 in the bank. I'm about to buy a plane ticket. I'm coming home. Like, I can't stay here.
Yeah.
I'm homesick already.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, no, you ain't. Like, there ain't no room here for you. We already packed up all your stuff,
Decision was made.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm stuck here. And I had to go to this chapel thing because SPU had requirements that you go to a certain number of chapel hours a quarter and do a report. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, that's.
I'm a different human than I was then. But there was this guy there named Dr. John M. Perkins who was speaking because they were also opening the Center for Community Development and Economic Development at the school to make better relationships with communities.
Okay.
And Dr. Perkins starts telling this story. He's kind of like a famous civil rights leader from Mendenhall, Mississippi. And he's like doing the Southern pastor thing and he's getting loud. And I'm like, okay, I can like get with this dude. Like, I understand where he's coming from. And he tells this story about some researchers, well-intentioned, that go into a neighborhood and they try to tell the neighborhood what the top 100 issues are that they need to deal with if they want to be healthy. And the community looks at the list and they're like, well, your list is great, but really our biggest issue is the rat problem. And the researchers are like, yo, that's like at the bottom of our list. That's not really priority.
Yeah.
And the people were insistent, no, we need to deal with the rat problem first. And luckily these researchers listened to the community, and when they dealt with the rat problem or helped bring supplies and make that happen, 70% of the list the health issues and the different issues that came up within the community disappeared. And Dr. Perkins tells this story to remind people that no matter how many resources you have, no matter what school you went to, no matter how smart you are, you will never know a neighborhood or a community better than they know themselves. And so your job is to, if you go into someone else's community, listen first, follow their lead, because they have the solution.
Yeah.
Those who have proximity to the struggle actually have the solutions. They should also have proximity to power. And so that, for me, that story that he told has always framed the way that I do my work. And really became a moment where I was like, as much as I feel like I don't fit in this environment at this school, there's something I can get out of it. And if I can continue to get knowledge and wisdom like that, then I can build the way that I want to work in the world. And so that really started to set me on a trajectory of always believing that I first and foremost want to listen to the community, follow the community's lead, and that will show us how to do our work right.
Yeah, it's kind of like being the leader amongst the people and not in front of the people too. I kind of see it that way. You know, a lot of people want to lead, but they don't know who they're leading. They don't really understand who they're leading, you know?
Right. Or like Ella Baker said, a strong people don't need strong leaders. You know, like if the people are healthy and strong in the absence of a figurehead, the people will continue to organize themselves for their own good.
That's real. That's real.
Yeah.
That's real.
For real.
No, I like that. And I think it's interesting too, just kind of being at SPU. I can kind of attest, I'm sure, a couple cats in here too. Like we went to Wazoo and it's PWI, you know, and you know, in the moment you're like, man, ain't no black people here, right? And then I don't like this, you know. And you see these HBCU homecomings and shit, and I'm like, damn, I want to be there. I want to swag surf with these niggas. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? But it's like, but now looking back, like that experience made me stronger, you know, understanding that I was the minority. I was in a class where it's all white, and I was still able to excel, you know. And that's the thing people don't understand. I think the environment you're learning in, the environment you're trying to thrive in, plays a lot into your performance.
Totally.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I often tell people, as hard as SPU was, it really prepared me for like the kind of work that I'm doing now, because you're always going to have to deal, at least in the world we sit in now, you're going to deal with whiteness and white supremacy. You're going to deal with classism and sexism. And that environment for me became a real organizing opportunity. I had a mentor, Joe Snell, who told me, you know, you may not like it here, but don't leave this institution the way that you found it. And part of that was because he knew that they would use my picture on their advertisements.
On the brochure. On the brochure.
You know, I don't want to be selling something that isn't what it is, you know. But also, you know, his philosophy always was like, what can you learn from this, and how can you make this place better? And I definitely learned a lot at SPU in terms of learning how to move through that environment and make myself successful. That prepared me for just dealing with living in a very white context. Or I mean, there's other factors there, you know, being a woman, being brown, being queer, you know, not coming from a wealthy family, you know, and learning how to navigate. In a lot of ways, I tell my young people, like, hustle the system. If you can learn how to hustle the college and university system, you can learn how to hustle any system. Like, ultimately, what I learned in undergrad helped me end up getting a Juris Doctorate and a Master's of Education at the same time, because I was like, oh, you can get schools to share credits, and then, like, while they're paying for law school, they'll pay for my master's too.
We call that finessing, right?
Right.
Finessing, for real.
You know, just taking those skills that we've learned in other places and flipping them to make them work for you, you know, in the world that you're living in now. That doesn't mean that I accept the world as is, but, you know, we still got to thrive, right?
Yeah. I think we have to finesse. I think as a people, I think we've been having to finesse, you know, since we've been here. Right. You know what I mean? These resources aren't being handed to us, so we got to find a way to finagle the system and get what we need. So I guess in what ways were you able to make your presence felt on that campus? And then I guess outside, when you kind of left SPU, I'm sure you did a lot of different things to try to, you know, use your voice and try to impact the school before you left it. What were some ways you did that?
I mean, SPU, I would say, is like the space that I radicalized in.
Okay.
When you are one of very few students coming from a particular background and you're sitting in the back of the classroom, and short story, it was my senior year. It was a sociology class, and this girl says, isn't bologna like the poor meat? So do, like, black people mostly eat bologna? And I remember sitting in class like, I'm going to lose my mind on this girl. And I only got 3 weeks left at this school. Like, I have got to keep it together. And luckily in that moment, there was actually this girl, I'll never forget her. She had bright red hair. And she fired back at her and said, "That's the dumbest question I've ever heard." And I was like, "That's right. Okay." But, you know, I was a part of a lot of clubs at SPU, but some of the biggest things that I got to push was for like systemic and institutional change. So SPU did not have a multicultural director, and that's what we called it at the time, as a part of the SPU Associated Students body. So you had like vice presidents for everything but addressing issues around diversity and inclusion. And so when I got in that role, that person didn't even have a desk or a phone or a computer. And I'm like, how you expect somebody to do all this work in this white wealthy institution, but they don't have a desk or a computer or a phone to do that work, and they're getting paid 80% less than the other people that are working within student government. And so really started to push for equity in that role, because we're oftentimes getting asked to do equity work, but not getting an equitable resources to do that work.
Yeah. I agree.
And so I learned a lot through that process about how do you make systems transformation, because you can make minor changes that make people's individual lives better, right?
Yeah.
But to actually make a systems change can transform the way that people have to interact with the system that's been marginalizing them. And so it was things like that about how do you get something moved into like a mainstream space so that it's functional, but it's also long lasting. It doesn't disappear after you're no longer in the role. And so it was, you know, people don't think much about a desk or a phone or a computer, but it's really hard for them to get rid of a position once they've changed the whole scheme of the office and spent money on making sure that position exists.
That's
and
real.
So,
that's real.
That was an important lesson I learned while being at SPU.
Yeah. The environment's everything, man.
Yeah.
I think it is. Like you said, they're little things. They're like minute things nobody cares about, you know, and a lot of times those can be the biggest things to us.
Right.
Right. Now I know you want to do some mayor talk, right? I know you wanted to get into.
Yeah, I'm getting caught up in the SPU story. This is, you know, I feel like there's a lot of relations there with him saying that we went to Washington State, so kind of feeling some of that stuff you're saying. It's
taking you back.
For real, man.
Yeah,
don't go back there.
So I pretty much just wanted to ask you, like, how'd you get into like politics and running for mayor?
Yeah. I will 100% tell you I have never had aspirations of being an elected official or really getting into politics. But kind of going back to that story I just told y'all, you know, we can mitigate harm or we can transform the system that's doing the harm. And so my running for mayor was not even really an individual decision. I didn't wake up one morning and be like, I want to run for mayor. In fact, I woke up a lot of mornings going, oh my God, I am running for mayor. You know, like, and so, and not because I didn't think I could do the job, but because, you know, even if we had won, it wasn't going to be the easiest 4 years. Like, we would have spent that 4 years in a lot of ways fighting a city that thinks it's progressive and trying to push the needle on what progress really looks like, right?
Yeah.
So it would not have been an easy 4 years. But the way that I ended up deciding to be a part of us running together, and I say us because it was a whole team. Like, I was working full time throughout the election, which is not what most people running for office do.
Yeah.
And that meant that there were a lot of things that a typical candidate does that I could not do. So I needed a team to make that work.
That's real.
But right after 45 was elected, you know, a lot of people kind of started to give into like a sense of political apathy. Like, what are we going to do? Like, the world is on fire. Everything sucks. And I'm just not that kind of person. You know, I'm a boxer. Like, I'm like, let's get in the ring. You know, let's make something happen.
Yeah.
If you train hard enough, you can win. You know, that's the way I look at things. And so we started getting together for like coffee and for dinners and like getting groups of people together talking about, well, what can we do? And the answer was, why don't we do something politically at the local level? You know, with the understanding of if you want people to mobilize, you have to serve people first. You have to have a vision of what it looks like to really change the conditions that people are living in. And so we started talking about that. And over time, people were like, we should run a whole slate of people for office. Now, running a whole slate of people would have been a serious task, right? It was hard enough running one person.
For sure.
But we came down to, well, why don't we run one person for the executive office in our city? Because an executive position, executive power actually gives you a lot of position to make big changes.
That's real.
Especially when you talk about the budget of a city. And, you know, in my opinion, your budget is a moral document. It outlines what your values are, who you value, you know, what values you want to see manifested in your city. And so that's a lot of power to be able to put that forward in a budgeting cycle to write that whole thing. And while the city council gets power to change it or, you know, make changes on it, you're the starting point. So, one of the aunties, actually a lot of the aunties in the community kept coming to me and being like, we think you should be the candidate. We think you should be the candidate. And I was like, no, like I will happily support anyone else, but like, come on, I'm like anti-establishment. Y'all, I mean, half the city knows my politics already. Like, but they were like, no, like we trust you. We believe in your integrity. We think that you'll hold to message, like whatever as a body we agree to, that's what you'll continue to put forth. You know, we don't, even if we don't always agree with you, we never have to question where you land on a topic.
You won't play the politics.
Right, exactly.
I feel that.
What got me though was right after the Muslim ban had happened, one of the aunties asked me to go with her to do some talking with Larry Gossett about how the county could become a sanctuary county. And we met with him and we talked, and that meeting went really well. And we leave the meeting and she was like, yo, you did that really well. I don't understand why you won't run for mayor. And we had a long talk about it. She was like, okay, I'll respect your choice. And the next day, this is how I know they didn't respect my choice, is a young person comes up to me at Creative Justice and says, yo, Miss Nikkita, I heard you're going to run for mayor. I was like,
Streets is talking.
I was like, your auntie is talking. And, you know me, I love young people. And I said, well, what would that mean to you? And this young person starts telling me, well, seeing somebody who reflects my community, someone I know, someone I trust, you know, it makes me feel like maybe I could run for mayor. And that's what got me, was knowing how important it is that we do things that disrupt the current narrative and starts to transform the story to tell something else. And so, you know, for me, it was never about the running for the office as much as it was about how do we amplify the voices of our community and how do we start to transform the conversation. And there was a point when we were running that we started to realize, yo, like we could win this and do something very transformative. But if we don't win it, what's the long game? Which is why, you know, developing the Seattle People's Party is really important. That we get a third party in the city that does represent the voices of people that are most pushed to the edges of our city. Because we're seeing across the nation how important it is to have candidates that reflect that story and honestly talk about those stories throughout elections.
No, and that's a big thing. That's one thing I think you kind of touched on was representation at the end of the day. We talked about this on a few episodes, but it's like the attempt in itself is a win sometimes, right? Like, even if you don't win the election, the fact that someone saw you run and go hard for it is enough sometimes for us, right? And being where we're at.
And nothing like, man, when some of these young girls come up to me and they're like kind of, they're having like a moment and I'm like, yo, I'm just Nikkita. Like, what's up? You know?
Good.
But then their moms are like, she's really inspired by you. Like, watching you run made her feel like she could do something she didn't think she could do. It's really, that means a lot to me. I mean, winning would have meant a lot, and it would have been a lot of hard work. And honestly, we got close. We got real close to making it to the general election. It's that story that like shows me how much power it has, because imagine that 12-year-old, that 15-year-old, that 17-year-old 10 years from now, how they're going to live their life differently, more rooted in their self and like how they believe what they can do, whether that's to decide to go into politics or something else. There's like a new sense of like empowerment. And I think that really means a lot for our community.
No, definitely, man. And we appreciate you too for the work you did and the whole team as well. Like, because it was dope for me, at least, you know, living in Seattle, growing up out here. I never saw an election. I don't know. I feel like when black people are involved, it's just more exciting. I don't care. I don't care what nobody says. I don't know. With anything, you know? But like, you know, when you were involved, it kind of got me more involved and wanted to stay in tune. And I'm not like, again, I don't really follow politics, to be honest, as closely as maybe some of my friends would like me to. But seeing you definitely made me pay attention, right? And I think that just speaks volumes right there.
Yeah, definitely, because it kind of shows me like, oh, okay, we're getting our foot in the door now. So that's where that inspiration for like younger people starts to kick in. They're like, what? Okay, even if she didn't win, boom, this young
The
person,
door's cracked open.
Yeah.
the door's cracked open, and this young person might be like, okay, I'm about to win this, and then
Yeah.
if that person, it's like we keep trying, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
and my real hope is that, if young people do decide to step into that any candidate we run inspires them to know they can do it as their full self. That you don't have to play the politic game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That you don't have to take corporate dollars. That you don't have to be the person who negotiates the justice your community needs just to get a seat. Because, we had all these political consultants that would come to our campaign and be like, yo, y'all are really viable. You just need to do X, Y, Z. And sometimes it would be stuff like, wear these clothes or use these talking points.
Oh, man.
And we would be like,
Nah,
like,
fam.
I like my kicks,
Yeah.
like
I'm good
For real.
love. I'm good love. Enjoy.
right, exactly. And we actually pissed people off because we weren't willing to take, those kind of consultants on our team, because we were like, no, we want to do this genuine and authentic. We want people to know who they voted for, as opposed to then that person gets in office and you be like, but you said X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Now you're doing
Yeah.
A, B, C,
Yeah.
which is kind of what our city looks like now. But
Yeah, and it's crazy you brought that up because I was talking to one of the homies, shout out my guy Kenny from Hack Nation, and we were just having a conversation about how much money the city of Seattle has, right, and how they're allocating it and whatnot. And I remember I was asking him to tell me a little bit more about applying for grants. I have friends who were asking me about that as well. And he was telling me how yeah, man, they're willing to give you some money. When it comes to us, they'll give us some money, but they definitely want to keep a close eye on it, keep a close watch on it. And if it does thrive, they want to kind of put their name on it as if they did it, right?
Yeah.
And it's that's the part that sucks, because I do remember going into an actual grant workshop and seeing a bunch of white folks in there who know the system, know the process, they're in and out, and I'm just sitting there like, wait, what the hell did she do? Wait, did she take a class to learn how to do this shit? So I think it's right, and I think you guys staying firm on your stance and your messaging is what really matters at the end of the day, right?
right.
Because you want to be shown in the right light.
Yeah, you want to have integrity.
Exactly. Now, speaking of you going into being a candidate for the mayor's office, I think I want to kind of get a sense of. So you said you were kind of seen as more radical, right, beforehand. And so what are some adjustments maybe you did have to make in terms of your messaging and kind of how you decided to voice your message? Obviously, if you're coming in as a marching on the street activist, then you become mayor candidate. I'm sure you kind of have to have two different approaches for those, right?
Honestly, I actually didn't shift.
Okay.
What we did was a lot of work to shift the narrative.
I got you.
So where originally they were just calling me Nikkita Oliver, the activist, we started putting out our own media, calling out the media, saying, why are you going to take this person and just put activist when there's also attorney, educator, community organizer,
Talk about it.
artist. There's a long list of accolades that I have that are just as important as anyone else that was running for that same office. And in fact, with some of them, it's the exact same accolade. At least 3 of the 6 front runners were all attorneys. I'm also an attorney. Why is it you forget that I worked hard for my Juris Doctorate and to pass the bar? Just because I'm also an activist.
And that's crazy, because for us, as a community, we want to support you, right? But if they're painting you in a light where all we know you as is an activist, and that's, we're kind of just going to run with that. So when people ask, why Nikkita? I'm like, oh, she's an activist. Why,
Right.
Why wouldn't you vote, But we wouldn't even know the layers that are behind that, right?
Right.
That is important, though.
And I think the flip side of that is also, though, we really tried to shift the narrative about the value of activists being in elected positions. I mean, the truth of the matter is you don't have to have just a law degree to understand how the law works. In fact, I know tons of community organizers who can tell you more about how city council works than some of the city council members can, because they've schooled themselves to know how to advocate for their own communities, right? So part of what we wanted to do in shifting the narrative was getting people to realize that everyday people actually have the knowledge and capacity to be elected officials. And in fact, that was the intention when this system was set up, or at least the superficial intention. I mean, we know what the other intentions were, but there was this idea that as long as you went and finished a public school education, you should be capable of being an elected official. The real critique, I think, there is if we don't believe that to be true anymore, that critique is of our public school system, right? Really what we're saying is our public schools are not good because we're not educating an educated populace, right? So we really tried to turn those kinds of narratives around and get people to start thinking differently about who's a qualified candidate, quote unquote. Nobody who ran for mayor in this last cycle had been mayor before other than Mike McGinn, right? And there's critiques of how he was as a mayor. So what makes a person qualified?
I don't know. I mean,
right.
You know, for me, I just, you know, it kind of goes back to when everybody's like, oh, you know, why'd you vote for Obama? It's like, because he's black. I'm voting for him because he's black. You know?
I feel like in that election that might have been appropriate. You know?
You know, and for that election, but that's kind of on a more bigger scale. But just more so, just we don't know these candidates as well as they make us make them out to be, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is being aware. You know, it's hard for us to vote when you don't know who it is you're voting for, right? And you see it all the time and how politicians switch up, and so you're like, why even bother with this person sometimes, you know?
Right.
So I think
and I think that's why a lot of people don't vote or don't follow politics. 'Cause at the end of the day, like, if people are switching up on you, then it's like, why would I engage anyways? It doesn't feel like it matters if I vote or not. And we really wanted to help change that narrative for folks. Like, it does matter if you vote or not. How can we do things that give us candidates we want to vote for?
Yeah,
definitely.
consistency.
I think that says a lot, because now, like, the emphasis is just voting, period. Not even about who to vote for, you know?
Right.
So that's like, that's kind of like mind blowing. It's like, damn, we're not even willing to vote because it's not authentic to us. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember like when Hillary Clinton was running and she went on the Breakfast Club, and they were like,
Hillary Clinton was on the Breakfast Club?
She was on the Breakfast Club.
I'm gonna have to Google that.
Yeah, she was on the Breakfast Club during her campaign, and they were like, oh, she's just pandering to black people. You know, she's doing this. She did like the hot sauce in my bag. With Beyonce.
I think I heard about that.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of shit like that just makes me like, I'm like, all right, man, like, is this what you're really about? Is this really you, or are you just doing this to try to appease me for my vote, right? So, I think some of the integrity in voting has been kind of erased. Would you kind of agree with that?
I mean, I definitely think, in terms of like, is there even anyone to vote for? But also, like, you look at what's happened post this last national election and all this stuff with Russia and what's coming out about, you know, what happened in terms of just overall tampering of the elections. I think people have a lot of reason not to have a lot of faith in the quote unquote democratic system in the U.S., right? Because, you know, between not always having candidates that you feel like represent your interests or representation at all, now you don't even know if, like, somebody's playing a game with you. And so that's terrifying. And then you look at the way the media spins things and, like, the use of narratives that are untrue to get people to vote for particular candidates. I mean, it can be very much... it's disconcerting, but I think it can make people feel so disillusioned with the system that suddenly they're like, I don't even want to engage. And that's a really dangerous place for us to be, because then what you're going to have is extremists who do engage, right? And then ultimately they end up controlling the whole system.
And then you get Donald Trump.
Exactly. I mean, it's true.
So I mean, there is an importance to prevent as well. I think voting is important to prevent certain things from happening as well. So it's kind of just finding that balance. And so, you know, you do a lot. You know, you ran for mayor, lawyer, right? You know, activist, and you mentioned boxing, right? So, I mean, obviously with having a busy schedule, doing so much, I'm sure everybody here has other things they got going on. But like, what's kind of stuff you use for me time? Is boxing one of those things, or is it just, do you have other things that kind of...
Training is a huge part of that.
Okay.
I box, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I do road work, obviously, for boxing. And for me, like, that's an important part of just staying grounded. I started boxing in law school because I would find myself sitting in classes where people would say crazy things, and then I would want to, like, pop off and say crazy things back, right? And boxing really helped me kind of figure out, like, psychologically and in my own physiology where those emotions settled. So that when those things happen, I could actually really ground myself in the moment and figure out, like, is this even something I need to engage? Which has been helpful for me in all kinds of settings. Like, even during the election, when I would just be tired and I would have to do these forums on, like, 3-4 hours sleep, knowing, like, in some spaces, there were going to be people who intentionally asked me extreme questions to try to get me to pop out because that's what they wanted to see.
For sure.
You know, boxing became a real tool for figuring out how to ground myself in the moment, because the last thing you want to do is get in the ring angry. I think people always think you want to fight angry, but reality is you actually want to fight grounded. You fight angry, you're going to throw haymakers in it, and a good boxer is going to knock you out. Right? So boxing has become like a real tool for expression and self-discovery. And like, you know, that's me time in a sense, but it's also just like people need to be healthy. Like, you know,
that's
real.
we need to exercise in some way or something, you know what I'm saying? And like, I think for me, that's self-care, is trying to define self-care within the realm of health. And if you're not healthy, you can't serve other people. So really trying to think about, you know, I think sometimes we get taught to think of self-care like go get a pedicure and take a bath. And those things are nice. But at the end of the day, like I want to be healthy.
Yeah.
So I try to do things in terms of my self-care plan that keep me in that space because I want to do this work for the long haul.
Yeah. Do you compete as well?
I do exhibition matches.
Okay.
Boxing is a little hard if you're like a thick, muscular woman. There are not a lot of women at 165.
The heavyweight.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So weight classes get in the way, but there are lots of exhibition matches that I get to participate in through the various gyms that I do work at. And then I'm hoping in the next year to compete in some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so,
Okay.
Get my grappling skills
You know what's
up.
crazy? Shout out my guy Howie from 9 Rounds Kickboxing Gym. I actually I've done like a good 4 sessions there.
Yeah.
You know, get my pad work on. And you know what's crazy is that like I tell people, I'm like, man, you guys gotta go try it out. And not just his gym, but anytime you can put the gloves on. I feel like it doesn't feel like a workout when I do it. At least it's fun. It's fun learning learning the combos, and you know what I'm saying, like.
Getting your Rocky on.
You know what I mean?
Feeling like you're Apollo Creed,
real,
you know?
It's real. Yeah, but it's good that you let the people know that, you know, if they did want to try you, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't even try it.
Don't try it.
Don't try it.
Nah.
You don't want these problems.
Or, join the gym and, maybe we could spar. There was actually a suggestion during the election, like, why don't you see if the other candidates will do a boxing fundraiser with you? I was like, no, that's a horrible, great idea.
Yeah, right? Let's just throw away the votes. Let's just go up. Let's just put it in the ring.
Right.
Winner becomes winner. That'd be dope. I'm pulling for that, man. I'm pulling for that. I feel like that'd be dope.
I think a whole new group of people would pay attention to the election.
Yeah. No, I just brought that up because, I mean, for people who are listening and watching, we always want people to know, like, when you're going after your dreams, when you're going after what it is that's keeping you up at night, it is important to find a balance. Yeah. Find things that you like to do, and that only you like to do in a sense, so.
I got to shout out Rain City Athletics because that's my team.
Shout out Rain City.
Marcelo Alonso's and Ivan Salavery's for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, got to put the people on.
Yeah, let them know, definitely. Man. Let them know, man. You know what I'm saying? That's dope, man.
So, there's something I wanted to talk about, too.
Okay. You got really intense.
The way he
it got so intense.
I know.
I was like, man.
I'm sweating now.
I'm sweating, too. They ain't even about me.
No, but it's just happening in my neighborhood, and that's gentrification or gentrification. I just kind of wanted to know what your thoughts are on that, and
honestly, gentrification for me is just like extended colonization. Many neighborhoods in Seattle, especially when we're talking like Rainier Beach Central District, and even the Chinatown International District now. Are experiencing like the second, third round of gentrification. It's not even the first. The Central District went through Weed and Seed, and that was kind of like an earlier round of it. But like you have urban renewal even before that. And then when the light rail came in, and when Old Holly became New Holly, like there are levels to how this has been happening. In my opinion, it's intentional. They know that when you do certain things, property values are going to change. Property values change. You're obviously going to push out some residents. And, not to mention, like, places like the Central District, that's not even where black folks would have chose to live. We were redlined there, right? So I think part of when we talk about gentrification, we need to talk about it within a historical context of remembering, like, first and foremost, we're already on stolen land. We're on the Duwamish land in a city that's named after their chief, right? And in a county named after Dr. Martin Luther King. And that context kind of paints the picture of really what gentrification is, and that this isn't the first time that it's happened. And as a community, I actually think we need to get to the point where we start to plan ahead of this curve. You look at places like Kent, Renton's already being hit, Federal Way, all the way down to Tacoma, right? Up to Everett. There are communities that are like they're in the wave, right? They're gonna get hit by it. So how do we start thinking in advance of that wave to start protecting our spaces, to start building economic relationships with each other, where we make sure people can stay planted, where we build community land trust, where we get cities and counties all on our side before that wave even hits. I'm thinking about places like White Center and Skyway that are unincorporated King County right now, right? And they want that land. Like Seattle wants that land bad because it's prime land to continue gentrification.
Exactly.
And one of the things I would really love to see Skyway and White Center do is actually start building their own community development plans, pushing back against that. I mean, those neighborhoods are already rapidly changing, right? But because they're unincorporated still, there's still a lot of space to make decisions and learn from the past. And also, how do we help people stay in their homes? A lot of folks in the CD and the South End have sold their homes because you bought it for however much, 200, let's say 200,000, and now it's worth $600, $700,000. Like, to us, that feels like a lot of money, but at the end of the day, having property is valuable. You know, that's a different kind of wealth. And Black folks in the last recession, we lost more than anybody, right? Our home ownership is one of the lowest in the nation, and so while gentrification is real, I also think our ability to be self-empowered and self-determined is also very real. So shout out to Africatown and Y King and the work that they're doing around the community land trust and trying to preserve Black spaces. The same to the Rainier Beach Action Coalition and Gregory Davis. They've been doing similar work in Rainier Beach because we know how important land ownership is. And for us, it's going to be important that we start to pile our resources together and build networks where we share that, whether that's thinking, you know, creatively about how community land trust can look or other methods. We have to start developing methods because bureaucracy is not going to help us. You know, that's not their intent. I think the city of Seattle, I feel like, has a vision of growing wider and wealthier. Whether they want to admit that or not, when you look at how the policies are unfolding, that's the trajectory, right?
No, and that's something. When you brought up kind of like Skyway and White Center, and you know, wanting to get ahead of the game in a sense, right? Part of me wants to like, maybe you can school us on this, but like, let's say they did do that, right? Would they ultimately have to get it signed off by the city, or wouldn't the city ultimately have to sign off on it so they can kind of stop it there if they wanted to?
I think I really deeply believe in the power of the people and the power of the community to organize. There's a great group in White Center called the Community Development Association. Celie Savusa runs it. And they've already done a lot of work around this. But one of the things I would love to see both of those neighborhoods do is actually start to develop community land trust organizations that they can help families and homeowners start to get into with each other. Because those kinds of agreements between community, the city's going to, one, look awful if they try to break that up.
Exactly.
You know, like, that's not a good look.
That's true.
But two, like, are going to have a hard time legally breaking those things. So I think it's actually really important that we find ways to organize as community to start building those shared economic relationships with each other, because collective economics is really the only way we're going to be able to thrive as a community, right? We're taught gross individualism here, but even if you look globally, communities that survive on collectivism. So the city could do some things, but you know, realistically, those areas are both unincorporated right now. There's a lot of community organizers that work in those areas, and some focus on economic development could really benefit families there.
Wow.
Damn.
Well, you heard it here first, or maybe it's not first. Hopefully, it's not first.
Hopefully not first. Because that was not a new idea.
I know, right? There's some old shit that y'all should have been on.
Thanks for letting me sound smart.
Nah, I agree with that too. I think it is important, and I think we kind of just have to be realistic about, let's just start getting some small victories along the way. Because I feel like, I mean, for Black people, it's like, we just want to change overnight, and it's like, it's not going to happen that way. And I think we just continue to get small victory after small victory, and hopefully eventually it'll accumulate to, being able to take control back of what's ours.
And part of me tries to believe, though, that a big victory can happen while simultaneously doing the work for the small victories. I think, somebody made a decision along the way that white supremacy was going to rule how this place worked, right? And that's the decision that has continued to impact the space, right? That wealthy folks and men and Christians, that's who's going to get access to stuff. That was a decision that happened.
That's real.
So you know, when people always tell me, well, Nikkita, you know, change is going to take time. I always say, well, that's a decision you just made. You just made a decision that change is going to take time, right? And while that feels unrealistic, I think sometimes when we're talking about justice and we're talking about thriving, we've got to start using our creativity and our imaginations to set a much higher standard of what change looks like. While working for the small changes to happen, like we stay consistent and diligent in doing that work, always keeping like a hopeful vision of what it would look like if we woke up tomorrow and there was a big decision like that made, right? Because there have been times when those decisions have happened and they've had a huge impact for a lot of people. Yeah. So it's not an impossibility. It may not be likely, but, you know, I love impossible things.
I like that because we talk about that all the time. It's like, I feel like not just in this context, but in general, I feel like everybody's going to have their moment at one point in your life. You're going to have an opportunity that's going to be in front of you. And it's like, what have you been doing up until that point to prepare for that so that you can seize that opportunity? So I think you're onto something here is just staying diligent, getting those small victories so that when that opportunity to take over overnight, that's just how I want to see it. I just want to see it happen overnight. But when that opportunity does present itself, you know, we'll be well equipped to take it and seize it. That's dope. And part of again, like you do a lot. So part of what you do that really inspires me, and I'm sure it'll inspire a lot of the listeners and viewers, is the work you do with the youth, right? Right. You talked about it a little bit earlier, saying that you're very passionate about that. And I did get a chance to listen to your episode on the Glow Up with Casey Carter. Shout out to them. But you said something that said your focus is on liberating the youth who are caught up in the system. Something along the lines of that,
something
right?
Like that, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't butcher it that bad, did I?
No, it was not bad.
Okay. But no, you know, kind of being able to be there for those who have nobody, right?
Yeah, you know, it goes back to the idea that those who have the closest proximity to the struggle should also have proximity to power. And really, you know, like the goal with the work that we do at Creative Justice is to create a space where young people can liberate themselves from that system and envision a better future for themselves and actually make that manifest. Creative Justice is a really dope program, if I do say so myself. But it's an arts-based, healing engaged project where we work exclusively with young people that are caught in the criminal legal system and are able to create a space where they make art, they tell their stories, and hopefully get free from that system. And the way that we measure effectiveness is not on how many youth don't catch cases. It's not about how many youth we've saved. It's really about how many youth have had the opportunity to affect and transform the criminal legal system. We want a more restorative system, but the only people who can teach us how to do that are the ones who have been most impacted by the punitive and retributive system. And so we do that through arts and storytelling. We pay young people because their time is valuable, just like anyone else's, right? And a lot of young people get caught up in the system because of economic needs.
That's real.
And we want to acknowledge that. And then, you know, we work to help mitigate cases. Can we get cases dropped? Can we get community service served through the project? We find partners to help families. And it's not easy work, and it's not a perfect process, but, you know, I really value and I'm honored to get to work alongside these young folks because they're wise. They're incredibly wise. They know a lot. They have a lot of ideas. They're just not often given spaces to voice those and then to see people actually act on those ideas, right? To act on those ideas with them. And so Creative Justice is one way that I do that as an artist and as an attorney.
That's powerful. And another thing that you also mentioned during that interview that I listened to, obviously not close enough because I butchered that last quote.
It wasn't that bad.
But no, you talked about kind of how you kind of an approach you take with the kids in terms of like putting them first, in terms of listening to them and kind of, you know, listening versus just talking at them, right? How important is that? You talked about how it's important for them to express and have a space to express, but I think that's something that is kind of lost is, you know, we've lived it, we know it, and so we're going to tell you how it is. So I assume you take kind of an opposite approach somewhat?
I mean, obviously I believe in like intergenerational relationships. Okay. I think people have wisdom they can share. Older folks older than me and myself, but also young people have a lot of knowledge, zeal, experience to share, right? I think specifically, you know, what sucks about court is that you go into that space and nobody asks you, what do you think you need? And in fact, it's a space where you come in and you already feel traumatized. You already feel like everybody's against you. So even if somebody asks you, what do you think you need? You may not say anything because for fear of like even you saying something being used against you, right?
Real. That's real.
And so I could tell you a million stories about young folks, but one of them I'll share is like there's a youth that I've worked with for a little over a year now. Incredibly talented, takes like some of the most beautiful photos I've ever seen. And when I asked them what do they need, they started to explain to me why sometimes they drink alcohol. And that's oftentimes what gets them in trouble with the courts. And I started to ask them, well, if you had certain things in your lives that would keep you from wanting to drink alcohol, what would it be? And this young person was able to give me a very thoughtful list. And then the next day we go into court and the prosecutor is laying into them and basically saying like, you know, you use and drink alcohol and don't want to go to treatment. But never once did I hear that prosecutor ask the young person like, what would actually help you not want to use?
What do you need?
But I had just had this conversation with them the day before where they were incredibly articulate about it. I don't have the same kind of resources the court has. Like, you know, I can't turn around and help your family have a home or change certain systemic things that's keeping their family out of having resources that if you don't have access to those, you're going to drink to try to survive through, you know, all of that trauma. And so it's moments like that remind me how important it is to listen to people, that they do know what they need, even if they're not always able to make that manifest. And when you're a gatekeeper or have access to resources, you really have to listen and then meet people where they're at or meet people with what they need. And that's what we have found is effective with the project is when we listen and create space for that. And sometimes it takes a while. Like sometimes young people come to program for 12 weeks and all they want to do on Tuesday and Thursday is sleep. And then they do it again with us for another 12 weeks and like suddenly they're awake every Tuesday and Thursday. And then they do another 12 weeks and then they're like making art with us, you know, and there's a progression to their progress. And so I really do deeply believe that people know what they need, but you have to get to a place where you can express that, where you feel safe to share that, and then where you actually believe someone is going to meet you in that. And those are not things that a lot of young people, especially going through the criminal legal system, often have.
I mean, I think,
I agree with that because like there's always a story to something. Like, you know, like for the sake of argument, if we all drank alcohol, we could all have different reasons for drinking. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I think that's important though, to like really listen and like really figure out like what they do need because it could be different.
No, I think it's just, it comes down to understanding. And sometimes, you know, being an adult, you don't feel like you have to understand someone who's younger than you, right? There's people that are 2 years older than me, but like, I don't gotta listen to you. I'm like, like, bro, it's only 2 years. Like, calm down, you know? But it's real. Like sometimes age, for some people, they think age equates you know, wisdom, which isn't always the case, I feel like. Now I do, you know, we definitely want to be mindful of your time. And I do also want to get into some things that are on the horizon for you, along with everything else you're doing. But so let's talk a little bit about some of the things you got coming down the pipeline. I know you mentioned you have a book did you already release it or are you releasing it or?
It's in the manuscript phase, so the hope is to release it in November or very early December. Writing a book is a lot of work, but you know, looking forward to it. It's called Pebbles in Our Shoes, which is inspired by a quote from Muhammad Ali, saying that it's not the mountains, but it's usually the pebble in our shoe that'll take us down. Now, see, I just butchered that, but basically, you know.
Yeah, I mean, when you're using,
I get it.
When you're quoting powerful words, man, it takes control of you. You know what I'm saying? Now you know how I feel. You know what I'm saying? So I guess because you sent me that quote, and I remember I was just trying to figure out like, what exactly was Muhammad Ali saying in that quote? Like, what do you think he's saying in that quote? You
know, like, when you're training and you're going for that run, that hill looks like it's going to be the hard thing to get through. But really what's going to kill you is if you got, like, a little stone in your shoe and you're trying to run up that hill, like, you probably have the endurance to get through the hill, but after a while, that stone chipping away at the bottom of your foot is going to really be the impediment that keeps you from finishing that run. And for me, that quote really just points me towards there's a lot that I'm capable of when it comes to the mountains. But if I don't deal with what seems like the small stuff, you know, especially the internal things that are like getting you on the inside when you're trying to run those big hills.
That's real.
Then you are going to stop. You won't make it through. And so you really have got to stop and take those small pebbles out your shoe or deal with those things that seem like small things, but really they're causing you big problems. It's really important.
That's
Damn,
dope.
yeah, that's crazy. Because the same thing with me. Sometimes I put the small stuff away and I'm just like, I'll deal with that later. It's cool. I got to deal with this.
Yeah.
And then little do I know, I got to deal with that before you can
get to
exactly.
that.
That's crazy.
And it's always going to be on your mind anyways, right? Like if you use Muhammad Ali's analogy of the pebble in the shoe, like I don't care how far or how long you're running, every step you take,
you think about that pebble.
Yeah, you're feeling it, you know?
That's why she said, I butchered it. I was like, nah, I get it. I know what you mean. No trip.
I felt it. Everybody's had a pebble in their shoe at one point.
Right?
So we got 2 quote of the days today.
Yeah.
That's dope. And then you also are going on a tour, right? And I know we talked a little bit about that, but I'll let you share more about it.
So going to the United Kingdom with Miracraft PR, and really excited about it, to go do some writing workshops, perform a little music, and do some poetry. But one of the things that's really important to me is that when I get an opportunity, that I always bring somebody on with me. And there's this artist in Seattle. He's just, in my opinion, incredibly talented, although I've known him since he's 12. So, you know, you know, I might be a little biased. But his name is Rel Be Free. He just put out an album called New Growth. And he's planning on putting out a new album for the end of the year.
Okay.
But I always want to take somebody with me when I get an opportunity. I mean, because as great as I am, to be honest, like my longevity as an artist probably isn't going to be like long in the sense of like visibility, right? Art will always be something that I do. I'm a creative. Art is a huge part of my self-care. It's also a huge part of my expression. But I think Rel has a lot of potential to be not just an incredible artist and MC, but he has a message. And he loves serving young people. He has a desire to put music out that helps people to think about the world that they want to build and also think about the world that they're in. And so I'm really excited to go tour in the UK with him December 7th through the 17th, and kind of get to explore another scene, right? And see how that lands, but also just see how we can be creative together. We're gonna go to a studio in Manchester, and for a couple of days just
lock in,
make music, and you know.
If y'all need some bars, you know what I'm saying? I
got
us.
I got okay, you got that pen?
I got a little something, you know.
You can't be butchering.
You know.
You can't be butchering close though.
Right,
you gotta be on point.
Right.
I know, you gotta be on point.
You're right. That's why I can't. I don't need ghostwriters. Is what I'm trying to tell you, because I can't read lyrics for someone else.
Nah, that's good.
Yeah, but that's dope, and I think it's important that we're all putting each other on. That's the biggest thing, man. Like with anything we do, you got to put your people on, man. People, especially people that you've known a long time. Like my guy right here. He's like, man, I want to get into photography. I'm like, pick up a camera, bro. Like, it's a camera right
here.
Let's
do it.
Let's do it. So
I think that collectivism. We talk about it at, like, how do we save our neighborhood, but also like how do we build with each other? It's like I always want to figure out how if a door opens, like how can me and like 2, 3, 10, 12 of the homies get through the door too, because in the long run, who wants to get somewhere and then be there alone? I don't.
Nobody.
So it's, and that's been with all the work that I do. Everything comes down to like building with relationship. And that makes me love what I do even when I'm tired.
Nah, it's kind of, I remember Issa Rae said something about how networking across is probably sometimes more important than just networking up, right? And using those people around you that are in the midst, going through it with you and making them useful, but also giving them an opportunity to try something that maybe they didn't know they can do.
Right.
And it just becomes another source of income from them. It can be, And
you never know, like someone on the crew might have an incredible skill that one day actually helps move you forward. Exactly. That's the other thing. I'm not always going to be the visible person, but I want to make sure when I am visible and my voice is amplified, that I'm making sure I'm doing for other people what I hope other people will do for me,
Yeah, that's real. That's real. Wow, man. Can we get some snaps?
Oh, the snaps.
We're going to keep it going. Now, I usually ask this question to wrap up our shows for every guest. And it's a great question to kind of sum up, a lot of what we talked about today, but also kind of to cast what's ahead, for you and just kind of for the culture that you're trying to cultivate and that we're trying to cultivate. So if you can, What's one word to describe what keeps you on the up and up?
Wow, one word.
You could explain it.
Hope. I know that sounds corny, but for me, I think hope is one of the heaviest, but also life-giving things you can keep in you, because hope can be just as painful as it can be like comforting and joyful, because hope means you still believe in something being able to happen, even if it hasn't happened yet. And that can be both a painful but also inspiring place to be in. And so, you know, hope from so many places, young people, elders, creativity, the small glimmers of like good things happening. You know, I try to find like a little moment of hope every day, even on hard days like today. You know, when I saw one of my young folks get sentenced and sit up, seeing them still be able to like leave that courtroom with their head up, and, you know, tell us, yo, I'm going to figure out how to make something for myself no matter what. You know, that's a moment of hope, right? That means like I gotta figure out how to make sure something happens, right? So hope.
That's real. I like that. That's the first one. That's the first time we got hope.
Yeah, that's the first time.
There's been some crossover words, but this is a good one. I like it. And hopefully the listeners and viewers definitely can pull. I'm sure they pull something from this episode, if nothing.
If nothing, it's hope.
If nothing, they realize I don't know how to quote anybody, so I'm not gonna quote nobody no more. But yeah, Nikkita, we appreciate you for coming to the show. We thank you and wish you so much success with, you know, everything you got going on moving forward.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And I think it's safe to say that Nikkita Oliver is officially a member of the UpNUp. Can we get a round of applause?